Mirror of this corruption of protecting Hunter and Joe and the whole Biden crime family is the abusive targeting of former President Trump with indictments by the Biden Justice Department and their and Democratic politicians in New York and Fulton County, Georgia. And the Fulton County, Georgia case and one of the case currently in Washington, D.C. By the Biden Justice Department target Trump for engaging in what any sensible person would see as First Amendment protected activity to dispute an election, activity protected by the Constitution in his role as president, to raise questions about whether the laws were filed, and his rights as a candidate to raise questions about the way an election was conducted and what his rights are in an election dispute. And so the Biden people want to jail him specifically for doing that and are trying to try him in court. Now, they obviously are worried that arresting him 4 times hasn't been enough to derail his candidacy. In fact, it looks like he's more likely than not, and his hold on the top slot in the Republican primary has dramatically increased since they've begun these string of arrests and indictments against him. Now, whether that will help in the general election, I think everyone can debate. But clearly, the left is still nervous about it. So they obviously don't think abusing the rule of law, abusing office, turning the Justice Department, the FBI, and prosecutors' offices in Fulton County, Georgia, and in New York City into essentially the arms of the Biden campaign, and abusing those offices to jail the political opponent of President Biden, that isn't enough. Now the left has concocted a new scheme, which is to falsely accuse President Trump of insurrection, which is factually false. No one, certainly the Biden people had a chance to indict him for, quote, insurrection. They haven't. And of course, he wasn't involved in insurrection. He was just raising questions about a challenge to electoral college slates in Congress. That's not insurrection. That's trying to use the laws and the Constitution to ensure that the election result is lawful and accurate and reflects the will of the American people. People have a right to do that. And Democrats have done that time and time again, but evidently when Republicans do it, it's outlawed. So it wasn't insurrection. Trump wasn't involved in insurrection. Everyone knows that, who, as I say, is rational and sensible. And on top of that, though, they use that as an excuse to have the 14th Amendment somehow keep him off the ballot. So arresting him isn't good enough. In fact, he could possibly be in jail next year. That evidently isn't going to be good enough because it won't keep him off the ballot. So they got to think of a way to keep him off the ballot. So they're playing the 14th Amendment card. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I tweeted this out. I forget specifically what I said, but I'm going to try to quote myself. Fraudulently using the 14th Amendment and falsely accusing someone to keep someone off a ballot, falsely accusing someone running for president, the #1 candidate for president this time, of insurrection. You know, isn't that insurrection? Would you misstate the Constitution and misuse the Constitution to target your political opponent and upend an election that way? Now, the presumption in all of these media discussions of the 14th Amendment was, oh, if he did insurrection, if he was involved in insurrection, which is a big if, and I don't think that's true, well, the 14th Amendment means he can't be president. Well, that's not true. Then let's go to the text of the Constitution, which almost always the left is loath to highlight. And it's 14th Amendment, Section 3, that's the relevant section. There you see on your screen. And I want you to read it carefully because this is going to be, you'll be tested on this later. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who have previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So what's missing there? As Michael Mukasey is highlighted, a former attorney general in the Wall Street Journal, Mark Levin is highlighted, others who have looked at this issue closely have highlighted. What's missing there? The president. He's not. There's no language in there about a president. The president is not an officer of the United States. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress. So there's no limitation on being a president, assuming they even did this insurrection or rebellion. Who, as an officer of the United States, because there's no reference there to a president, so the left is trying to suggest that the president is an officer of the United States. So Trump took an oath as an officer of the United States. An officer of the United States, dear friends, is someone who is appointed by a president or by one of his appointees. The president of the United States is not an officer of the United States under law. Do you think the founders just, or in this case, the writers of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, forgot to add president in there as someone who was covered by this? So the 14th Amendment, a plain reading of the 14th Amendment means that there is no way, lawful or constitutional way, to keep President Trump off a ballot. Now, is that going to be the end of the discussion? Of course not. You have all of these, you've had a few conservative law professors pretend to find a meaning in the 14th Amendment that isn't there, that it applies to the president. Again, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress. Okay, so it's no prohibition on the president. Under this reading, even if they had previously taken an oath, maybe I'm misreading this, but I think I'm fairly reading it. Even if they had previously taken an oath and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion, they still could be elected president. But a presidential oath of office to defend the Constitution isn't covered under this constitutional provision. Now, the left's response is, Tom, you mean the president can engage in insurrection and rebellion and be eligible for president of the United States? My answer is, that's what it says. Now, I want to take a step back again. There was no insurrection. The president was not involved in it. If there was, of course, I don't think anyone's been charged with insurrection. There's been these, in my view, absurd seditious conspiracy charges here in Washington, D.C. that have led to over-the-top sentences for people who weren't really involved in seditious conspiracy, but that's a whole other matter. So this is a straightforward analysis. Does the 14th Amendment apply in these circumstances? The answer is no. There is no good faith basis to assert that President Trump was involved in an insurrection, or is there a good faith basis to suggest that the 14th Amendment provision here even applies to him as a former president? It doesn't. It doesn't apply to him as a former president, and it doesn't restrict his ability to run for office. It's a straightforward analysis. Now, as I suggested, there's a debate about it, and the left doesn't care what the rules are. They make it up as they go along. There's already a left-wing lawsuit in Colorado trying to keep him off the ballot. You can be sure that a Secretary of State or two who is friendly to the left is going to concoct a reason, using this as a basis, to keep Trump off the ballot. And then it will be adjudicated, hopefully, in a way that allows Trump to get back on the ballot as the law and the Constitution requires. But in the meantime, Judicial Watch is obviously looking at this issue quite carefully. Our lawyers are examining, the constitutional issues here. I'm giving you kind of my summary analysis as what my layman's understanding of this. But in the meantime, we know Secretaries of State have been talking with each other about this, and we've initiated a massive Freedom of Information Act investigation into this scheme to keep Trump off the ballot. So I'm just not commenting about this. I want to let you know that we are doing something about it as well. We want to find out who's talking to who, what they're talking about, and whether and how they're avoiding and interfering with the election by, frankly, even considering this to any significant degree. It's just another way to undermine Trump's rights to run for president, undermine his candidacy. But in the end, really, it's an attack on you, isn't it, dear voter? I mean, you should have a right to have a presidential candidate on your ballot, and you don't have to vote for him one way or the other. But there shouldn't be some leftist group that puts their thumb on the scales, some judge that puts their thumb on the scales, some local prosecutor who puts their thumb on the scales, or a special counsel who puts their thumb on the scales, or a federal judge, or a state court judge who come in and think they can run the federal elections by deciding who can be on a ballot for president, where the Constitution obviously doesn't give them that right, or in the case of the prosecutions of Trump, pretend that it's just a normal prosecution and it doesn't matter if the whole election system in the United States is upended because they're given the time of day to these political prosecutions that the courts should summarily dismiss almost immediately. So our republic continues to be under attack. Judicial Watch continues to expose and highlight the abuses, give you the truth about what's really going on, and hopefully in educating you, adding to the negative pushback on this abuse of power. So I'll let you know when and if we get any documents on this issue, this 14th Amendment issue, but it's all part of the piece. It's all part of this effort to upend a constitutional government and really just end elections for all practical purposes. Because if candidates can only be on the ballot if Joe Biden says they can be, or a prosecutor in Georgia says they can be, or a Secretary of State in Colorado says he can be, and otherwise, there's practically speaking, you could vote for him in another state, but because he's not on the ballot in another state, your vote is negated. I mean, that's not an election. It's not an election. That's a banana republic. We just got victory after victory last week. The biggest one, or I guess it's like they're, Judicial Watch victories are like my children. Which do I love more, right? I love them all equally. D.C. removing 130,000 ineligible names from the voter rolls in response to Judicial Watch. And what Judicial Watch has done is second to none in cleaning up America's voting rolls. And this is on top of 4 million names from voter rolls across the nation that have been cleaned up just in the last year or two by Judicial Watch. So let me give you the background here. Judicial Watch, after the 2022 elections, started analyzing data in the states, and mostly states, and much of the data is data that the states are supposed to provide to the federal government, and the agency is called the Election Assistance Commission. And the data is supposed to include the numbers of names they've removed pursuant to the National Voter Registration Act, which requires reasonable steps to clean up the rolls, which means they got to clean up the rolls every now and again, because as you might imagine, being an American yourself, the people move around a lot in this country, or they die, or otherwise become ineligible to vote. And so you got to track that and clean up the rolls, because when you have a bunch of dirty names in the rolls, it increases the opportunities for fraud in elections and certainly undermines confidence in elections. People think everybody and their mother's on the list, including people who haven't been alive for 15 years, who are moved. You know, you're in Kansas and they moved to Florida 13 years ago and they're still on the voting list. That ain't good. And that's why the federal law requires the states to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. And that includes, thanks to Judicial Watch, solidifying this process through our litigation previously. If you don't show up to vote and in a federal election, this is what's supposed to happen. The state, or a covered jurisdiction under the NVRA, should send you a card or some type of communication. Let's say it's me. Hey, Tom Fitton, I live here in the District of Columbia. You didn't vote last election. Are you okay? Not like that, but are you still there? And if you don't respond to that communication or vote within the next 2 federal elections, so that's upwards of 4, maybe even 5 years, depending on how the calendar runs, right? They're supposed to take your name off the rolls. Now, in the District of Columbia, I don't know for sure this happened, but it looks like they sent the notice card saying, hey, are you there? But they never bothered to follow up and take people's names off the rolls who weren't there. And so Judicial Watch noticed that they weren't cleaning up their rolls based on the CAC data. And so we sent them a letter saying, what's happening here? This was a nice letter early on. And I don't know, did I get the letter out? I think we were supposed to print it out, but I don't have it here. So anyway, the letter was dated in the beginning of last month, November. And they admitted to us that it removed, oh, there's the letter there. Let me put on my glasses so I can read it. I'm going to come up close and read it to you. I'm writing in response to the notice of violation sent by Judicial Watch on September 22nd, 2023. So we requested that they correct these issues in their list maintenance program. That's the legal, or our way for talking about it. So we note the failure to remove voters from the registry from November 2020 to November 2022 pursuant to the law, and the number of inactive registrations as a result of its total registration rate. So if people haven't voted in a long time, the states call them inactive. They're still eligible to vote, but they call them inactive to pretend that they should be there and they're being treated appropriately, when in fact that's not true, especially if they're there for years and years. The board has taken several list maintenance actions since we provided our last response to Judicial Watch. First, the board removed 65,544 inactive voters on October 30th, 2023. This letter is dated November 1st, so I think it was the day before or two. How many days? It's October, 31 days in October. 65,000 names, that's incredible. And they did, this is the process as I described to you. The voters did not vote in the 2016 general election, did not respond to the address confirmation notices that the board sent, and did not participate in any district elections held between the dates of the notices that were sent and the November 2020 general election. So they became eligible for removal. But they didn't do it until Judicial Watch bugged them earlier this year. The board will soon remove an additional 37,962,000 inactive voters. So you know what that means. It's well over 100,000 voters they're removing. That's 15% of the list. And it goes on. The board will, the voters did not vote. Again, they highlight. Second, the board moved 73,000 voters from an active to an inactive status on October 3rd, 2023, as a result of the 2023 biennial process or canvass process. And so that those names won't be removed for a few years yet. So 100,000 names were removed because Judicial Watch asked the D.C. Board of Elections, what's going on here? You haven't cleaned up your rolls. And they responded by removing immediately 103,000 names. That is 15% of the voter list in Washington, D.C. I think there are about 700,000 voters. If you do the math, it's about 15%. Incredible. Incredible. Now, is that good enough for us? Well, if we could trust that the program was put in place and they were going to regularly follow it, other than through this ad hoc fashion, yes. But as I'm describing the process to you, you can see they only do something when we ask them to do it. That's not the way it's supposed to work. So we sent them another, or followed up with a notice of violation letter. And I guess that one from September is still valid. So that one, we may end up suing as soon as this month. But it's not just in D.C. that this issue has arisen, because we've done an analysis nationwide. California and Illinois have dirty voting rolls, in two based on their own data that they provided to the federal government. So we sent notice of violation letters to Illinois and California. The notice letter to California, which was sent on behalf of Judicial Watch and the Libertarian Party of California, states, California's survey responses to the Election Assistance Commission shows that 27 counties reported removing 5 or fewer, and in most of these counties, 0 voter registrations in the last 2-year period for failing to respond to an address confirmation notice and failing to vote in 2 consecutive general federal elections. Another 19 counties simply did not report any data about such removals. And then 21 counties had more voter registrations than citizens over the age of 18, based on census estimates. So what does that last part mean? It means they have more people on the rolls on the voter rolls than are living there and eligible to vote based on census data. Now, California, we've had litigation before, and we settled, and part of the settlement resulted in, what was it, what was the number? 1.2 million names being removed just since last year. I think the total was 1.6 is going to be removed. And California generally sent a notice out to all of its counties as a result of this settlement that you got to clean up the rolls, as Judicial Watch has suggested. Of course, I don't think they gave us credit like that, but that's more or less what was said. Obviously, that hasn't been the case. Same goes in Illinois. Illinois has a similar problem. 23 Illinois counties reported removing fewer than 15. And in almost half of those counties, 0 voter registrations in 2 years, between 2020 and 2022. "34 Illinois jurisdictions simply did not report any data about such removals, so they're not even telling them what they're doing, which in my view means they're not doing anything. And 15 jurisdictions have, again, as I said, more voter registrations than citizens of voting age. And these are some of the counties in California and Illinois that we're talking about. Let me see here. My colleague sent me a note about it. I get a lot of emails. I'm sure you all get lots of emails, but I really get a lot of emails. Let me search for it here. But Orange County's on the list. California. Here it is. So in California, here are some of the problematic counties. Orange County, they've got 2.1 million names in their rolls. They haven't cleaned any of them. Data not available. Riverside County, 1.586 names, 1.586 million names on their rolls. no information about what names they've cleaned. San Bernardino, 1.3 million. Santa Clara, 1.2. Alameda, 1.1. Ventura, 609,000. San Francisco, 606,000. San Mateo, 555,000. It goes on and on. So when you think and apply the numbers from California, from D.C. to certainly the numbers in L.A. County, in terms of they're removed about 15% of their rolls as well. I mean, that's a total of, among the counties that we looked at, 14 million names, right? So we're talking potentially well over 1 million names that should be removed under this process. I'm guessing here. I'm just guessing because I don't know exactly. I mean, some of these counties may come to us and say, oh, no, we removed all the names. Don't worry, don't worry. But we know these counties have been around long enough that we know this. We've been following this long enough, and the behavior of these counties generally to know this is what's been going on for too long in California. And the same in Illinois. The two big counties are Cook County and Chicago City, which have Cook County has a 1.9 million names on their rolls. Chicago City has 1.5. So that's the major Chicago metropolitan area. And those jurisdictions haven't reported removing anyone. Anyone! For 2 years from their rolls. What's going on there? So we sent these notice of violation letters. And as I said, we sent one to D.C. earlier. And this is what we told D.C. We sent it on behalf of the Judicial Watch and the D.C. Republican Party. There is a Republican Party in Washington, D.C. You may not know that. They don't have a lot. I don't think they have anyone in public office. Certainly in the D.C. Council. I don't think so. D.C. reported removing 0 voter registrations in the last 2-year reporting period for failing to respond to an address confirmation notice and failing to vote for 2 consecutive general federal elections. And they flatly admitted to us that it was failing to remove registrations as required by the law. Just doing it in an emergency fashion after Judicial Watch tells you what you ask you about it. That's not what the law is supposed to be. So I don't know if this number includes the number of the voter registrations they removed, but maybe it's beforehand. But we noted in the letter that it was 131%. They had the total registration rate, its total number of registrations divided by the most recent census estimates of citizens voting, of its citizen voting age population, is greater than 131%. So let's put it this way. Voter registration rates in states range from, of the voting age population, it used to be 75%, but now it can get a lot higher than that because it's easier to register to vote in a lot of these places. So it can be upwards of 85, 90% in some jurisdictions. And I'm sure there's always outliers. It's even closer to 100. But obviously anything over 100% is not right. And if it's 131% of your eligible population, there's something really not right. So this is the beginning of what might be additional litigation. So if we send the notice of violation, and if they don't respond as appropriate, and we're not satisfied with the response, we have the right to sue. And this would follow several lawsuits we filed previously over the years to clean up the voter rolls in California, in Illinois, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Indiana, in Kentucky. We had a consent decree in Kentucky. They are cleaning tens of thousands of names. They had been. North Carolina, we settled as well. We just settled in Pennsylvania. And as I said at the top of this discussion, 4 million names have been cleaned as a result of Judicial Watch litigation just in the last few years. And let me put it this way. If we don't do it, no one will. No one. I don't think the Republican Party is cleaning up the rolls through litigation. Maybe they've started doing it since we've been doing it. And there may be one other two groups that have started moving, have moved around this area as well. Certainly on the area of the specific controversy of them not bothering to remove people who die, which is a whole other matter. beyond moving away. I mean, if you can't figure out a member of your jurisdiction died, well, what's going on? Dead people on the rolls is an abomination to election security. That really gets people upset. It really does. And of course, this is a law that can be enforced also by the Justice Department, but they refuse to do it because they oppose efforts to clean up the rolls, because the Justice Department is controlled by partisan leftists who want to make it easier to steal elections. They do. That's how I explain it. But they admit it that way? Of course, they're not going to admit it, but that's my analysis of their behavior. Why else would you oppose voter ID? Why else would you support ballot harvesting? Why else would you oppose efforts to clean up the rolls or not even enforce the law in that regard? And all the other efforts to undermine election security measures. They want to be able to, they want to make it easier to steal elections, And that's why people's confidence in our elections are, the confidence has been plummeting in recent years. And will continue to plummet unless our elected officials get serious about election integrity. So I'll let you know when we file the federal lawsuits. I'll let you know if other states start removing the names, as they should, like in Illinois and California. There are other states that are on our radar that have also issues with the rolls not being clean. And as I said in our press release, let me read my quote. Dirty voting rolls increase the potential for voter fraud as Washington, D.C.'s quick cleanup of tens of thousands of names in response to Judicial Watch shows there are potentially hundreds of thousands of names on the voter rolls that should be removed by California and Illinois. Indeed, Judicial Watch litigation resulted in the removal of 4 million names from voter rolls in various states recently. So our election law team is led by Bob Popper, who is a former Justice Department senior attorney, and he's been at Judicial Watch for, I don't know, I lose track of how long people have been here now, but at least 10 years. I think it's full 10 years plus. And he does some great work. I had an interview with him recently. We should repost that interview, or at least post a link to the interview with Bob, who can describe these issues to you more fully, or he described them more fully to us through the interview a few months ago. So we should repost that or link it. So great work by Bob Popper, our election integrity team. And we're pleased to be working with our various partners in this area as well. The D.C. Republican Party here, the Libertarian Party. Who did we work with in Illinois? Did we work with some? Oh, we work with a voter in the Illinois Family Action Group, which is an activist group in Illinois, a great group, great conservative bunch of activists out there doing the Lord's work quite literally, not only through their own work, but with Judicial Watch. Big news out of Washington, D.C., or actually out of the Central District of California, which is the federal court district out there. There's been a new indictment of Hunter Biden. And it's great that Hunter Biden was indicted related to tax code violations. But to be clear, it's the result of IRS whistleblowers, public pressure, a federal court blowing up that sweetheart plea deal. Remember back in Delaware last, I guess it was the summer now, she blew it up. And now and of course, this indictment initially wanted to be, they were thinking of bringing and should have brought 2 years ago, at least. And they didn't because the Biden Justice Department obstructed it. And so now, 2 years later, is it a day late and a dollar short? I'll let you decide. But I do know there were charges that they could have brought 2 years ago that they passed on and can't bring because the statute of limitations has lapsed. And the case that they've brought is somewhat limited in the sense it's significant tax charges, but it's kind of like charging someone for not paying their taxes on their bribes. And the bribes were directed not only at, in my view, Hunter, the evidence shows, but Joe Biden as well. And it blows out of the water, and it has the Justice Department confirming in this indictment that President Biden repeatedly lied when he said that Hunter Biden did nothing wrong and he got no money from China. So here it is in black and white. I want you, I will provide, I guess we can provide a link to the indictment. You should read the indictment. Remember, they're only allegations. They have to prove this in court. But the Biden Justice Department confirms what I see as a racketeering scheme involving Ukraine, Romania, and China to the benefit of Hunter and Joe Biden. And I'm going to read to you a key section related to that. This is page 3 of the indictment. Between 2016 and 2020, the defendant individually received more than $7 million in total gross income. And then they go through and they describe what that income is. Burisma Holdings Limited. Remember, they tried to impeach Trump. Well, I guess they did impeach Trump, but then they tried to remove him unsuccessfully for raising questions about this Burisma deal. And this indictment confirms those questions were well-founded and that the impeachment of Trump was a cover-up designed to protect Joe and Hunter Biden from being found out for what is now being admitted to by Joe Biden's own Justice Department. In or around April 2014, that was when Joe was vice president, defendant Hunter Biden joined the board of directors of Burisma Holdings Limited, a Ukrainian industrial conglomerate. Burisma agreed to pay the defendant an annual salary of approximately $1 million to be paid in monthly disbursements. In March 2017, Burisma, what happened in 2017? Joe Biden left office. Why would Burisma cut Hunter's salary after Joe stopped being vice president? Why do you think that is? Burisma reduced his compensation to approximately $500,000 a year. They cut his salary in half after Joe left office. But he continued to serve on the board of directors until in or around April 2019. As a result, he received a total of approximately about $1 million in 2016, $630,000 in 2017, a little under $500,000 in 2018, and $160,000 in 2019. The Romanian contract. So this is a country you don't hear much about with Hunter Biden, but there was Romanian-related corruption and bribery related to Joe and Hunter as well. In the fall of 2015, when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, the defendant entered into an oral agreement with Business Associate 1, purportedly to help a Romanian business person, GP, contest bribery charges he was facing in his home country. GP paid an entity associated with Business Associated 1 through GP's Romanian business between November 2015 and May 2017. Business One's entity received approximately $3.1 million, which was split roughly into thirds between defendant Business Associate 1 and Business Associate 2. So that was about $1 million for Hunter to help the Romanian target of a corruption investigation escape scrutiny in Romania. Well, how could Hunter do that other than through the auspices of his father's office? Obviously, it was a shakedown. Now, here's the biggie. Well, Burisma's a biggie too, right? I mean, there's only a war in Ukraine. You know, isn't that relevant to this? Of course it is. And then, of course, we face this threat from China that's that has gotten worse under the Biden administration. And I think because China knows Biden is weak because of his corruption. He's compromised directly by the Chinese. In the late fall of 2015, this is under a section titled CEFC, China Energy Company, Ltd. The defendant, Business Associate 1 and Business Associate 2, began to investigate potential infrastructure projects with individuals associated with CEFC China Energy Company, Ltd., a Chinese energy conglomerate. In or around December of that year, the defendant met in Washington, D.C. with individuals associated with CEFC. Now, by the way, this is Chinese Communist Government company. This is not It's not like Pepco or, you know, I don't know what the name of energy companies in other parts of the country are. It's not your regular utility like here in the United States, which, by the way, have too much government control behind them anyway, but that's another matter. But they're not wholly owned entities of the government or controlled entities of the government like they are in communist China. So this is so whenever you hear this company's name mentioned, CEFC, just substitute Chairman Xi, the communist dictator of China. That's who's given the money, practically speaking, to Hunter, and obviously indirectly Joe. In around December of, let me start over on that section. In and around December of that year, the defendant met in Washington, D.C. with individuals associated with CEFC. During the next 2 years, the defendant and his business associates continued to meet with individuals associated with that company, including in February 2017 with the then chairman of the company, the chairman, as the indictment reads. On or about March of 1st, 2017, State Energy HK, a Hong Kong entity associated with CEFC, paid approximately $3 million to Business Associate 1's entity for sourcing deals and for identifying other potential ventures. The defendant had an oral agreement with Business Associate 1 to receive 1/3 of those funds, so that's $1 million from the Chinese communists, or $1 million. The defendant, in turn, directed a portion of those $1 million to Business Associates 3. So he split that with his other buddy. After the state energy payment from the Hong Kong front for the Chinese communists, the defendant, Business Associate 1 and Business Associate 2, began negotiating a joint venture with individuals associated with the Chinese Communist Energy Company, which they called Sino-Hawk. Over the summer of 2017, the defendant cut out his Sino-Hawk business partners and separately negotiated a venture with individuals associated with the CEFC called Hudson West 3. Now, Sino-Hawk, was that Tony Bobulinski's group? I think that was. And I think he was the one who was cut out. On or about August 2nd, 2017, the defendant executed on behalf of Owasco, O-W-A-S-C-O, P-C, which is a front, again, for Hunter. So that's Hunter's companies, his and his business associates' company. The operating agreement for Hudson West 3. Hudson West 3 was founded with an initial $5 million capital contribution from an entity that was not owned or controlled by the defendant. The contract further named the defendant as a manager of Hudson West 3 and specified he would receive compensation of $100,000 per month and a one-time retainer fee of $500,000. Owasco POC paid no capital contribution for its ownership share of HW3. So what does that all tell you? The Chinese gave Hunter $5 million and he drew money from it. In exchange for what? It's not clear. Well, we kind of know what, which is influence peddling. Shortly after execution of the contract, on or about August 8th, 2017, Hudson West transferred approximately $400,000 to Owasco, I think is the name, and that's, again, the Hunter company. Thereafter, Owasco received monthly transfers of approximately $165,000. So they kept on getting money from that pot of gold the Chinese had given them. In total, Hudson West made 7 transfers to Owasco, totaling approximately $1.445 million, and that was in 2017. And then he transferred some of that, $555,000, to his business associate 3. In 2018, Hudson West 3 made another 15 transfers, totaling approximately $2.1 million, and of that, Hunter kept the bulk. He only transferred $843,000 of that to his business associate. So all of that, the government attributes as Biden's income that he did not report on, and instead he was spending money on the following items, allegedly, all sorts of detail. I mean, some of which is, you don't want the IRS digging into you, because they can find out every last thing you were doing with your money. And Hunter, rather than paying his taxes, was taking out approximately, I'm looking for the chart. Forgive me for, and I didn't tell my colleagues here I was going to look at the chart. Do you all see the chart, what I'm looking for in the back of the expenses? What the page is? Well, anyway, he took out $1 million plus. I remember the chart. I'm not going to look for it anymore.
Page 13.
Oh, page 13. There we are. To the rescue. So rather than paying his taxes, he's giving money to his father in part, it looks like. $1.6 million in cash ATM withdrawals. So you know where that money went. Payments to various women. Again, that's the government's words, not mine. $683,000. So the prostitute trade did well. Clothing and accessories, $397,000. That's a lot of money. I mean, I can't imagine spending. I'm one of these people who would have trouble spending $100 on a piece of clothing at any one time. Unbelievable. Tuition, educational activities, $309,000. Retail purchases, $236,000. So all sorts of purchases that are unrelated to the taxes he owed, which I think was well over $1 million in taxes that he was refusing to pay for years, for a total of $4.9 million. So of that 4.9, he should have been paying his taxes, the government says. So as I said earlier, it's a devastating indictment of what Hunter was up to, and the fact, and it confirms that monies were flowing overseas into Hunter's business ventures, and they were being used to take care of his personal expenses. And the purposes of these monies has been alleged with quite serious evidence to be bribery. Specifically, Burisma is alleged to have offered bribes or was talking giving bribes to Hunter and Joe to keep anti-corruption investigators off their back in Ukraine, $5 million each for them. And China's taking care of Joe Biden's son and Joe Biden, because Joe Biden, the evidence is, was also involved with this CEFC as well after he was vice president. And we know separately from Judicial Watch's investigations that Hunter Biden was traveling all over the world with Secret Service protection while his father was vice president, including on Air Force Two to China, where I think Joe was involved in a meeting with one of Hunter's business associates or wannabe business associates. So this is not, obviously Hunter Biden is facing time in jail as a result of this indictment, which, as I said, doesn't really go to the heart of the issue, which is this was a bribery scheme. This was racketeering. Joe and Hunter Biden, the evidence demonstrates, should have been registered as foreign agents, right? Foreign agents for China. But this is corruption that goes to the heart of the presidency of Joe Biden. We have more evidence coming out this week from Comer's committee that this Owasco, I think, gave money directly to Joe. So these business entities were paying Joe. Now, the defenders of Joe Biden are saying, oh, those were for loans. Those were for car payments, providing no evidence. And of course, loans and car payments and repayments are notorious covers for illicit cash transfers, loan repayment. How many mafiosi have used loan repayment to take, to disguise a transfer of wealth to a capo or something? I mean, let's be clear. The Biden family, their business operations were run like a racketeering operation, and the idea that, we have demonstrated evidence of money going to Joe, but the idea that the money had to go to Joe in order for it to be a crime, the racketeering, is baloney. If I come in and say, take care of my family member, or I'm aware my family member is being taken care of someone with illicit monies because of my position, and they expect favors from me in return, that's bribery. Is under the law as sure as I'm getting the money directly. Of course it is, right? Of course. So I encourage you to read the indictment. I encourage you to encourage your members of Congress to move impeachment along forthwith. They can't impeach Joe Biden soon enough. I mean, right now there's a fight over whether Hunter Biden is going to testify pursuant to a subpoena by the House of Representatives. Now, he may or may not testify. Whether that fight happens or not, I don't think is necessary to the issue of whether or not Joe Biden is impeached. But I keep on going back to they tried to drive Trump out of office for blowing the whistle on the corruption that has this day been confirmed by the Biden Justice Department. Incredible. Incredible. So I'll keep track of this for you. If anything important happens in these cases, I'll try to let you know. And of course, Judicial Watch will continue its independent investigations of this Biden corruption. For instance, we exposed just last week, I want to remind you because it is important. I don't want you to forget it. And if you haven't heard about it, I want you to know that Judicial Watch uncovered an email through the National Archives showing that Joe Biden's staff in the Vice President's office sent him and copied Hunter Biden an email about a meeting with the Ukrainian president. Why was Hunter Biden copied on an email about a meeting with the Ukrainian president? It further shows that when it came to corruption in Ukraine, Hunter and Joe are joined at the hip. And again, that's uncovered by Judicial Watch, not by Congress. Was it released voluntarily? Either we had to sue for it. Federal lawsuit. That tells you something, that it takes a federal lawsuit to get a simple email like that out, right? Years after the vice president left office. The reason we're able to do this work again, get the word out despite the censorship, spread this information, is because of your support. Either by watching this video, sharing this information, this video, plus the information below that I'm sharing with you and talking about here, the documents, the information about the lawsuits, and of course, as importantly, supporting our work directly with a generous financial support, financial contribution. So I encourage you to donate to Judicial Watch. I know this is the time, this is the season of giving, right? As we come up on Christmas, go to judicialwatch.org and you can support us there directly. And I encourage you again, support our work in all the ways I'm talking about. Share the wealth in terms of education, and please share your wealth with us directly so we can do more of this great work.